Yeah, and I'm on the fence
I've
about.
got fucking PTSD. I keep expecting Legion to just break into the intro.
we have trauma from literally just having a conversation with our friends at this point.
You weren't there, man. Well, you were.
What is your shirt? What is that? It looks like Minolta symbol.
This is Aperture Science.
Oh my goodness, I was going to say, I think it's Portal. Oh,
Well, yeah.
speaking in very broad terms.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Minolta had a very similar one.
Revealing that they were, in fact, the evil company the entire time.
I could say something slightly weird, but Minolta is a sexy sounding name. Minolta.
I feel like it's very
That's
nearly
tasty.
an STD.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Well, that's ruined.
You're welcome.
I read a long time ago, when I was in college, that there were some companies, corporations, before they came up with a name, would study and research names that would be the least offensive to people. And Xerox came up with their name through that method. They thought for some reason Xerox was, as a corporation, didn't bother people.
Xerox is a very evil corporation sounding name, though.
I know. That's what I'm
The
saying.
name that says nothing. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. It's so neutral that it sounds bad.
Yes. Yes, that's a real, you've got something to hide.
It's that sinister innocence.
Yeah. Welcome to Totally Innocent Company. Yeah, it's that bollocks.
Welcome to Legion Corp.
Before we begin, the Gamers Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
Welcome on into another episode of the Gamers Advocate podcast.
I thought I had just gotten over the trauma, but no, we're right back into it.
You interrupted my game of Tetrio.
Yeah, well, you get 1,000 gamers in a room and you might get 1,000 different opinions, but, we like to cover all topics in good, bad, ugly, whatever. But
Literally the title of the episode that's being released today.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I didn't actually read the description. I just went by good faith that you did it. So
I appreciate that, Legion. I just, whatever you put, good
absolutely.
enough. It has a description.
If you can't trust the people you co-host with, what are you doing? But
It's
yes.
weird because I thought our friendship was based on suspicion and doubt.
Yes.
Ours is.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Legion's. Yeah.
just fucking floating above us all on his cloud.
There's among us and then among y'all.
I'd play that game.
Same.
It's just Among Us, but everybody has southern accents.
It's just lots of cowboy hats.
Oh, yeah, I got mine right over here. Put it on.
Well, that's fine. I've just realized we're doing the episode.
Did you hear about FromSoft is actually moving forward? They're probably going to be acquired by Sony. True story.
What effect would they actually have on them?
If you look at the past for Sony's very intrusive with how they develop games. Like they will tell the developer, we want this. That's actually what's my little experience with, there's sometimes, it's worked out like God of War and stuff. They said, hey, look, this is kind of, but they already had a vision of what they were going to do with that. And they just kind of went with that. But like Star Wars Galaxies way back in the day, they said, we want Jedi. We want them by Christmas. And they're like, we're looking at a 4-year plan. No, within the year.
I'm trying to think of the first party games from Sony, and I actually can't remember any. So we have God of War, then I presume is...
Well, that's Santa Monica, but what I'm saying is that they own the developer, and that's what's going to probably happen, is they're going to end up owning FromSoft. What's funny is that FromSoft was actually looking at being acquired through unscrupulous methods financially by a different company And so they were trying to avoid that. So it was kind of like the lesser of the two evils. So I think that's what's going to happen, because they've been in negotiations with Sony for years, and they've just kind of put it off. But there's another company that's really big in Asia for manga, and whatnot. So they kind of like just own everything with that stuff. So they're a huge like publishing group for not just, you know, games and stuff, but they own a lot of that stuff, that entertainment. And they're the ones who are really, really manipulative with how those things work with developers. And FromSoft is saying, if we're gonna be, you know, bought over, you know, purchased or whatever, bought out, let's go with Sony.
I mean, yeah, I'm thinking of games that maybe first party was the wrong word, but sort of published by Sony. And I've just kind of gone into the memory banks trying to remember, and I don't really have a big feeling of concern, because I'm thinking Ghost of Tsushima.
Huge concern after Sony's involvement with Helldivers.
Helldivers 2. What was
Sony was a huge
Ghost of
part of the
Tsushima,
reason that
God of
Helldivers
War,
2 didn't
Spider-Man,
get what it deserved.
Death Stranding.
Concord?
They have shown that they're willing to permit these more interesting style of games and to let studios stand on their own 2 feet. I wonder if Helldivers was in an unfortunate position of being that multiplayer game where they realize, okay, we can actually farm this. And what did they do? It was to do with the validation, right, for the PlayStation Network?
So you had to have a PSN account, which is not available in many countries. And they actually did end up going forward with that, where Helldivers 2 is now not available in those countries. So they just destroyed a potential market base because those people couldn't commit to Sony.
Yeah, because I know they rolled back on it at one point, didn't they? But I guess that was for a few days.
Yeah, they didn't require it for the game, but now they're not selling the game in places where you can't get a PSN account.
So I imagine this would be sanctioned countries and things like that primarily. I don't know for sure. This is my guess.
I'm not 100% sure on what the criteria is for countries who can actually get those accounts.
My understanding is that they did remove that after, but at release that was required. Yeah. And
the requirement to have the account isn't there anymore, but the game is not available in places where you can't get an account. So they're only selling it to people who could potentially create a Sony account.
Right. But at first they did require it.
Yes.
And that was the problem.
And there was a huge backlash on that. And then Sony was like, we're not doing that. We're doing that. But we're
goodness, I'm just looking actually at a map of countries where you can't get a PSN account, and it's much more than I expected.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And essentially it's Africa. Not exclusively, but large parts of Africa. I think you can see the Baltic states up there, Belarus, which you've got the Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. Yeah, you actually have a lot, Mongolia, you have a lot of countries where you can't actually have this. And apparently the microstates of Europe as well. So San Marino, Andorra, etc.
Mm-hmm.
God, that was a shock. In my mind, it was going to be a handful of countries. And I was expecting it to be countries on sanctioned countries lists.
Mm-hmm.
But no, this is, and essentially all of Africa.
Well, you were approaching this with logic and reason. That's your first mistake.
Yeah.
Well, Algeria.
But there's also Concord, and Concord was a massive failure, so much so that a lot of people speculated that Sony is going to release, or is going to allow Bloodborne to be released because they got to make their money back after Concord.
I feel like Concord has become the new standard of failure.
I feel like
people use that as like
about a week.
A metric.
Yeah. Well, I say eventually. Yeah. Well, I think what you're seeing there is something that in my mind leaves nothing to be concerned about directly for Souls. The games we've mentioned have all been multiplayer, and Sony dipping their toes into those multiplayer developers seems to cause problems, like they did with Helldivers, like they did with Concord, like they did with Star Wars Galaxies. But those the single player titles that they're publishing, again, things like Death Stranding, God of War, Spider-Man, Uncharted, Ghost of Tsushima, they seem to largely leave those alone.
Well, those are largely single player games. And although
that's what Com's saying.
But there is an online aspect to the Souls games. And so that's something that Sony
in the same way that there is for Death Stranding. Yeah.
Right, but they could leverage that. And they could say, see, it works in a small, well, let's just make it bigger.
I should also come out, like, to be clear, I'm generally against monopolistic construction. So on the whole, bad thing. Like, if we have to speak philosophically, bad thing. I'm just looking for reasons not to be too concerned in the short. I'm looking for reasons not to be concerned in the short term for the Soulsborne games.
I would also imagine, given the success of FromSoft's games, they have some leverage in the negotiating room to say, you're not going to invade what we do to that extent. You're going to give us certain freedoms and certain powers over our intellectual property, and you will reap the benefits, but you have to let us do what we do. I would hope that's the case. I have no idea. I'm not involved. But I think there's just such a kind of universal respect for FromSoft that it's pretty tough for anybody to be like, oh yeah, Sony needs to come in and fix things. Like, FromSoft's not in need of repair.
Still remember from when EverQuest was the biggest MMO in the world, and they basically made Star Wars Galaxies, and Star Wars Galaxies did not work. It could not compete with WoW that came shortly after because of Sony's involvement. They took it over.
Yeah, like I wouldn't base too much tomorrow based upon sort of games from 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But it is worth keeping in mind that they do have a track record that also extends until the more recent day. I think we have to lean our hopes on what Banana said, that this company is a company that was already on a strong footing, that they have developed a series of games which are genuinely iconic, to the point that their brand, and not their brand of game, so not Dark Souls, not Bloodborne, not Elden Ring, but FromSoft, as a brand is already so strong, you'd like to think that they would have had plenty of negotiating power at the table, because I would firmly believe that they could have self-published in the future going on if they wanted to. With the money they made from Elden Ring in particular, there's no reason they couldn't have worked on their own. There must be a reason they'd have gone with Sony. Essentially, I'm channeling pure cope through my veins because I really don't want anything to change.
Yeah, so this is like aggressive optimism.
Yeah. If this means they have a bigger marketing budget, if this means more people get to play it, great.
I think there's other dynamics here that are going on because the parent company over FromSoft now has their fingers all over the place. So they kind of are like, they're not one of those that like, hey, this is our focus. So they've never had to like tell FromSoft, or really probably even had the ability or the know-how to say, oh, this is really what we want you to do. They were just kind of like lucky to run, be owning FromSoft basically. Now, like I said, there's zero evidence to suggest that anything bad is going to happen from all this, but mark my words, I am very concerned.
A few moments later.
Of redemption, you were chosen, thrown together by forces beyond their control. Tragedy must be averted. And for that, I need your help.
Stand tall. dare approach.
Band together and prepare to claim. The life of the Night Lord.
Well, I think this is what we need to be. We need to be not even cautiously optimistic, but cautious. You just have to. We're in a wait and see situation. We can't change anything. We don't know the ins and outs of these contracts. All we know is that a beloved developer of games that people enjoy, that are very niche, despite how many some of them sell. It's a very niche style of game. There's a whole group of people who will never play them for multitudes of reasons. But there's a massive crowd who will almost exclusively play these and that adore that style. And we just have to hope that Sony keep their fingers out of it and let the developer get on with what they've been doing for a very long time. Yeah. I'm going to keep cautiously optimistic. I'm going to hope that combination of Sony generally having these very strong single-player titles combined with the leverage I would hope that FromSoft would have in negotiations leaves it in a strong position going forward, and we maybe just see the advertising budget increase and sadly some of the profits being diverted to Sony. And I hope that's the worst of it.
For me, the history of gaming, you can't put a rubber stamp on it, but you look at like what has been the most recent success. And a lot of times parent companies say, look over there, that worked. Let's try to implement it here. You see it a lot from when RPGs were a dying title before Baldur's Gate 1 came out. And then Baldur's Gate 1 changed the game and suddenly RPGs were big again. You had the MMOs, they go in these cycles to where everybody tries to like catch that moving target. And you have to look at the most recent games, what have been the most successful ones. And I would say in Asia, that was a big seller is Black Myth Wukong. So you're going to potentially see FromSoft being told, look over there. That sold more than your stuff did. We want you to be more like that. So I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying you kind of have to like see what's happened in history and then maybe apply it. And so that's just how these higher ups in these companies think.
Yeah, it's like I say, it's that analysis of the recent history of it that leaves me not too pessimistic about the video game's future, specifically with Sony for this single player game. If it was a beloved multiplayer game, I think I'd be a lot more concerned. But my issue with the purchase of the rights to become the publisher for these games, it really falls into a much larger concern about how many video games are now being centered into a handful of extremely large publishers. The mergers and acquisitions that seem to be never ending in this. That can't be good. That cannot be good. There is, what situations do you really have where monopolies increase the I don't want to say consumer experience, but here we are, where monopolies improve the consumer experience. It's almost never good for us.
Oh yes, almost universally monopolies reduce quality. You're just ending up with one organization that has the luxury of saying, this is what we're going to put out, and you're going to buy it or you're not going to play video games. We don't need that.
And here's a good example. BioWare Dragon Age. Dragon Age Origins was developed even before Mass Effect, but when it came out after Origins, it was acquired by EA, and now we have Dragon Age 2, which I still like. But oftentimes it's like people who go from that and they see Dragon Age 2 like, oh, this is what happened. What happened to BioWare, right? Well,
I would like to point out, Legion, the Veilguard has come out, and that means that now Dragon Age 2 was perfect, and why can't everything be more like that?
Yeah, I know.
Don't forget that.
Like everything is like rose-colored glasses. I know. I get it.
10 years from now, we'll be talking about how great Concord was and why everybody blew it.
I had a brief discussion with somebody that was like saying, you know, I'm just not excited about titles nowadays because everything comes out flawed and buggy. I'm like, you know, I'll be honest with you, 25 years ago, and I think it may just be an age thing, maybe 25 years ago, I was, you know, I guess it was 2000. I had a child. I actually had 2 children. I was married with a mortgage, and PS2 was just not on my radar. I just didn't care about it. Nothing on there was getting my interest. I was a PC only type gamer. But can you imagine with all those PS2 titles that were amazing, right? In retrospect, me saying I didn't like PS2. I just, none of those games appealed to me at all. But we could take that same mindset 25 years from now and say, how could you not like this game or that game? That was a Baldur's Gate 3 came out during that time period. How could you not be excited about games during that time?
Oh, I remember someone, I think it was a live stream I was doing on Twitch a while back, and someone complained about modern gaming. It reminds me of kids like in 2006 saying that there's no good music anymore. Why isn't everything like fucking Poison from the 80s? Ugh. But no good games have come out since 2020. And I just wrote a list. I was just opening it back up, and it was a very quick top-of-the-head list. And since 2020, there's Elden Ring, there's Ghost of Tsushima, there's Baldur's Gate 3, there's It Takes Two. It's a weird choice, but it's an interesting game. There's the Ratchet & Clank games, there's Nier Replicant, there was Stray, which I didn't like, but it was interesting and different. Gaming's doing really well. Really well. And in a few years' time, we will remember the best of the best. We'll remember Balatro. We'll forget some things. But we'll remember that best of the best and look back at this era, I think, with very, very fond, perspective. I didn't mention Rebirth, by the way, but I'm mentioning it now.
Yeah, you may not be excited about titles nowadays, and you may say they all have. Trust me, games have been buggy since I can remember. You know, tried to play Temple of Elemental Evil on PC. I wanted to play that game. I looked forward to it, and I could never get it to work. Never got it to work. But games have been buggy forever. So being jaded about games not being fully, optimized at release is nothing new.
I think we have hit a double-edged sword with development of video games. That ability to continuously patch a game, which should just be a good thing. Because there's nothing wrong with that. The ability to just go in, fix problems that we find. Quality assurance in game design, it's very rarely their fault when an edge case slips through. Because a quality assurance team on a video game is a playtesting team, sorry. It's a very, very small group relative to the millions who are going to go on and play this game.
Right.
And they can try all the edge cases in their minds, but they're not millions of people. They're not going to have all that weird shit. And maybe not always the maliciousness that we go into things as just a player as well. So the ability to go on and make patches to these games post-development, post-release, is great. And when a company uses this as a tool in the positive sense, think of No Man's Sky, Baldur's Gate 3, which is continued ongoing development with these free updates and patches. I think The Witcher 3 did something similar when it came out. It had those mini bits of DLC that were actually free. That's a wonderful thing. On the other hand, it did allow us to release games maybe sometimes a bit earlier than we should, with the knowledge that we could go back and fix them later. There is always that.
Go on. Sorry. I think that's one of the important things to consider with the quality assurance teams, because I'll look at some of the games that I've seen that have a lot of quality issues, mostly the Sonic games, and I've heard discussions with members of the quality team, and it's almost universally that we have a finite team, we have a schedule. We know all of the issues you're seeing. We saw them too. We brought them up. We don't have the same amount of time that our player base does, because once a game's out, it's out. The player base has forever to find these issues, and they have roughly an infinite workforce to find these issues. The quality team has six guys. They're all like, yeah, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, and the devs are like, pick one and we'll fix it because it ships tomorrow.
Well, they're drastically overworked generally as well, these quality teams. Like you said, they're very small. Normally people who are quite young into the industry too. It's easy to get these people in sort of burnt out. You can rely upon their love of gaming to maybe have them working these extra long hours, and then they're exhausted. They're not going to pick up on everything. The things they do pick up on aren't always going to be then developed on, and then the game gets released into the world. And in that case, you do give 1 billion monkeys 1 billion typewriters, and they manage to break Star Wars Galaxies.
And I think the other thing is that when you are involved in the team developing the game, you have some insight into the goal of the game. And not speaking for any other gamers other than myself, I have a tendency to let my mind wander while they're explaining important things to me about what I should be doing in the game. And then I find myself in the situation where I am now in an environment where I don't know what I need to do to progress. So I'm going to try everything. And when your quality assurance team has an idea of what the game is supposed to do, they're probably not going to do the stupid stuff that I do, because I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, so let's do everything that I'm not supposed to do so we can rule those things out.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, if you want to take that approach, if you want your quality assurance team to do the stupid stuff that I do, you're going to need a lot of them, because I'm exceptionally stupid. You need like 4 or 5 people just to replace me, and there's a lot of me.
And this is it. They need to be working primarily on those behaviors that are the more common edge cases, if you will. The things that they expect people will probably try, but they probably shouldn't, to do the really inane, stupid stuff.
Yeah.
No offense. There is something.
Don't
that they need to
apologize
do,
for being accurate.
fair point. But there's simple limits on time. As we mentioned in our previous video on currency in video games, when you have exclusively limited resources, at some point something has to give.
Right.
And in this case, you simply cannot cover all of this. And they also know, in the age of live patching where we can do this, that they will get that massive increase in bug reports, that massive increase in quality control issues when they release the game to the public. So we kind of got a bit rambly towards the end there. I say we to cover the tracks for it being me.
No, you're fine. But like if you have a quality assurance team, like Banana was saying, where you have like 6 things that you identify, and even if you can fix those, the development team may not have associated, because they may not be talking on the same, they may not have worked on the same thing. They're just fixing that thing, which in turn broke 6 other things, which in turn broke 6 other things. So quality assurance is one thing. It's another thing to like have the bigger picture of why things are the way they are. Sometimes it's the code. Sometimes we couldn't climb that hill, or like there was a barrier there and we didn't mean for you to fall through that, because before there was no scene there. We had to like move it in, you know? So
that's something I've learned in my experience with software development, is that, and this might not be universal, it might not be appropriate in gaming at all, but in my experience, we typically break the development up into tasking of individual components. So when you're working on one thing, you work all the way through it, you release a finished version and you have quality review that, and then you move on to your next task. And then quality comes back to you and says, there's these issues, you need to go back and fix them. And while you're going back and fixing them, what's going through your head is not all of the interdependencies. It's not all of the connections that this update will impact. It's, how do I fix this issue? So you fix this issue and it creates a downstream issue somewhere else. And if that section has already been reviewed, that issue might not get caught, because quality already approved that issue and doesn't recognize that the changes that have been made will now impact that other section. So it's this kind of never-ending cycle where you have to update software as a result of a bug and then review everything again. So every time a bug gets fixed, QA has to review everything again. So by being good at their job, QA creates more work for themselves. It's this never-ending punishment for them.
And I think that's actually really hitting the nail on the head, is that idea that it's a job that can never really be done.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll see this with the most polished of games, that at some point an error turns up. And this will be 10 years after the game has been released and everything's been done and the QA team doesn't exist anymore. They've all gone on to bigger and brighter things. The development team doesn't exist anymore. And we're still finding bugs, still finding interesting little things that have gone wrong. There's nothing we can do about them now. I think another thing that maybe we also have to think about with the playtesting team is that when a problem maybe goes back to the developers, so they found problem X, they send it back to the developers, if you have, especially on an indie level, maybe a fundamental problem with the engine that you're working in, causing this problem, there may well not be a way to fix it, or not be a way that you can actually get around it in the first place. There are so many potential problems and pitfalls in video game development, so many things that can go wrong, and how every little, thinking on a really simple scale, every little function that you develop somewhere in your code is capable of having these tiny little knock-on effects all the way through. There's essentially no way to complete quality control. And this is why, generally, I will always love the fact that we can go on and continue patching a game after it gets released. The only problem with the idea of post-game development or post-release development is when a company then uses it for nefarious purposes.
Right.
Or decides that they're going to use it as a way to farm more money from the audience. Mm-hmm. Then it's bad. As a tool, it's a wonderful thing. But the implementation is the problem.
I would say the other issue with that is when you have this intent to clean up things after the game is released, how do you retain all of the people who worked on this program indefinitely to say that we need you to be available in case somebody finds a bug in 5 years? Like, no, I have other things I need to be doing, and you're not going to pay me a full-time salary to wait for a bug report.
And dude, there are, like, on my very limited knowledge of development and coding, there are functions that I wrote 3 days ago that when I go back and look at, I think, what the fuck is this? Yeah. And it can be commented as thoroughly as I want. At some point, you're reading with a slightly different mindset. You're reading with a slightly different perspective. Coming into that as a new developer is going to be nigh on impossible. Going into it 5 years later is already going to be very difficult. So, of course, they're not going to keep you on retainer. But also, I'm thinking of, because of course I am, because it's what I do with my free time, I'm thinking of Rebirth. The development team who made Rebirth was largely the team that made Remake. And it's now largely the team that's going on to make Part 3 in the series. Okay, great, so we've retained the team, but we want them working on that new game. I don't want them working on that new game and then saying, excuse me, can you actually piss off for a day and go back and fix this bug in Rebirth that we've just found? No, I want them moving on. I want them actually doing something new and doing something different and interesting.
When you talk about like the similar developers and stuff, I mean, like Baldur's Gate 3, like you brought up before, is an excellent example of it, because I think Banana and me would probably agree, because we played a lot of the beta. I mean, I had, it came out, 2 years before it actually was fully released. And I had well over 1.5K hours in it. But the most stable portion of that game is Chapter 1, which was in early access that whole time. So they had the opportunity to have all of these thousands of gamers to play, and it gave it feedback, what worked, what didn't work, where things were, needed to be patched and fixed over that time period. What's the buggiest part of the game? Chapter 3, right? As you kind of advance. So, and that's very typical of Larian. I mean, that has happened in previous titles for them too. But that goes to show that you can try to say, hey, look, we know about this, let's try to find all this. And then stuff gets found that they didn't even know about. But that's because they just didn't have access to the data of the feedback. But yeah.
And that has a very real game development consequence as well, because I've mentioned before that Baldur's Gate 3 actually didn't really do it for me, so I haven't got to Chapter 3. I've done most of Chapter 1, and that's all. I think I'm at the point where you can transition to Chapter 2, but I just stopped playing. I wasn't having fun. But Divinity, Original Sin 1 and 2, I adored them both. But goodness, their earlier chapters were much better games than the final chapters of those. Mm-hmm. The ones that have been in the hands of the public that we'd had a chance to comment on, request features that we'd like to see developed, request dialogue options, things like that. So you have that very real knock-on to the actual game development, where putting it in the hands of the people made a better game and a more interesting game. And it becomes almost a hallmark of Larian Studios, I'm so sorry, that their early games are generally much better than their end games.
Mm-hmm. And I just looking at that situation, when you have, that open beta or that early access, and you get feedback from your player base, and they allow you to incorporate corrections into your development before the game is released. If that became a standard, I think the gaming community would riot, because we don't work for you. You're basically giving us the quality control jobs and not paying us, so that we are partly responsible for why the game is great. And it feels shady, but like the result with Baldur's Gate 3 kind of shows that it works. You get an exceptional game when you listen to your player base. Imagine that. But do you really want every game from now on to have a 2-year early access period where you provide the developers feedback so they can give you the game you actually want?
Yeah.
I have to imagine that most of the gaming community is just like, I don't have time for that. Give me a functional game. Just do better.
We can also ruin the game experience, can't it? I'm thinking of, for example, if I go back to early 2000s, and now and again, I think I'm going to say this, I'll legally incriminate myself. No. Statute of limitations. It's nothing bad. Pirated movies. I'm thinking my uncle turning up with like a DVD of Lord of the Rings, for example. Well, I can watch it on that kind of crappy DVD that's a handheld camera copy of a film screen somewhere. And I watch the movie, but I don't really get the great experience. And then eventually I get to go and watch it in the theater. I get to go and watch it on the big screen with the sound. And the fact that I've seen it before dampens the enjoyment I'm actually going to get. And there's a lot of joy, I think, on a very basic, primitive human level of give me a date when this thing comes out and it's fully developed and everything's perfect, and let me go and watch it on that day, that you would lose if Jimmy's played actually Chapter 1 already. And now my other buddies played a lot of Chapter 1, and you spent 14 hours trying to figure out this bug in this tower, whatever it might be. And it also reminds me of the thing that just Banana was saying about we're doing the work of these studios for them if they put the games into our hands. And it just reminded me of this idea that social media, it's a bit of a tenuous point, but hopefully you'll see the link, because if not, it's my fault. Social media is essentially a state surveillance system manned by volunteers. We're doing your job for you, and not in a good way.
It's also an advertising agency that doesn't pay. So we're all Twitch streamers. We're basically building publicity. Well, I mean, the 9 people who watch me are getting more info on the games that I play than they would otherwise. We're doing work for these developers, and honestly, in an ideal world, that's not an issue, but because, money exists, it becomes a problem. But the reality is the dev studios have a responsibility to deliver a quality product, and the best ways to get that quality involve the gaming audience in the development process. And it's how do you navigate that world where the people who want to buy from you also need to be involved in what they're getting from you. It's a really tricky situation to be in, to say like, we want to give you what you want, tell us what you want and we'll build it. And then if it's not what you want, we'll rebuild it. It just becomes this continuous cycle of like, pay us to make you happy. Oh, you're not happy? Keep paying us.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why the early access has gotten such a bad rap. I actually like it personally. And this is for me I should not be the one who says that they like it, right? It seems like a lot of them, I don't know. I don't want to group people, but the people I've talked to, well, anybody between the ages of like say around 20 to around 35 do not like early access. They want a game to,
Hey, I'm not in that window. Right. I'm not in it.
Right. And because that's not all, but that seems to be the majority of people I run into just don't like the early access. I don't have a problem with it as long as there's some ethical behavior of the devs to do that. In other words, you don't want an early access that has clearly had very little updates to no updates over the course of 5 years. Right?
But this is, again, where you fall into the implementation versus the tool question. If your use of early access is that you're genuinely going to use this info to regularly update your game, to genuinely improve it, to look for bugs, for ways to make the gaming community want, then that's great. On the other hand, if you're going to be one of those Kickstarters from 2012 that never actually got released, then it's awful.
Right. But see, like a game like, I'll give you an example, like Farthest Frontier. I've talked about that before with Com, and I've streamed it. I love that game. But let me tell you why I bought the early access day one when I did. Because they were the same developer, even though it's a colony sim from like 1800s, like a pioneer, like very cozy. I love the music. It's perfect. It has weather. It's nice. And they've constantly made up
trees.
Big trees, really huge ones. But it's the same developer as Grim Dawn. And I know Grim Dawn was great. And I was like, you know what? I'll give them a shot. And back then, it was the early access game was $10. Now, if it's not on sale, it's like $30. And so that's the part that I like about early access, is that if I trust the developer and you know, or at least the game looks almost complete, like Traveler's Rest is another one that I've done. These are all early access games, and I know there's a moniker behind those things. But if there's enough trust there for the that you believe that the ethical standard for that developer going forward is to make it a better, more complete game with tons more stuff to be added probably in the future, if not just like Baldur's Gate 3 is doing, then you get a cheaper game at the end of the day. And then you also have the ability to see that game grow a bit and be like, man, I really see from like where it started, and I can't say enough praises. And there you go. Maybe they won me over with the crate team that does Farthest Frontier by doing that, by committing to that. They had one beta that I was in for Farthest Frontier that where all the villagers were bears. And they're all dressed up in their shoes and their, hide outfits and jackets and stuff. And they were just walking around as bears. And I think they were just kind of pushing what their characters could do, even on a little tiny level. So that was neat.
I think we would actually have slightly different responses to these studios. So for myself, I think the only games that I would do early access for wouldn't be a studio that I trust. And that's a bit of an odd thing to say. I'm not saying it would be studios that I mistrust. I would only do early access for a studio that didn't have a game yet, where it was very, very early in their development and they probably need some sales to just stay alive. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm going to be checking that they have been actually doing updates, that they have been making sure the development is going, that there's a reason to believe that they will put out this game that I do want and it looks good. But I think any established studio, I wouldn't feel comfortable participating in early access whatsoever, because that's when I feel like they're gaming me a bit for my money, and I would feel a bit more uncomfortable with the idea. Essentially, I would like to see first-time studios, you're permitted early access, you're allowed to sell me this copy. Established studios, fuck you, make a demo, and make a public demo that we can all try. Give us that first 4 hours, and let us offer our comments on that.
Yeah. I think me and you are on the same side of how you think about that, Com, because Manor Lords is a perfect example of that. Manor Lords is made by one person. And at some point, you don't have the resources and the ability of the time. You need more people involved to kind of make that game even what you think, because what they've done so far in that game has been incredible. So, but yeah, I mean, that's one that I think you would be on board with, because they never come out with a game before, and it's incredible as its own, and it looks like it's going to be finished. And as it is, it's highly playable. So.
Yeah, and also, I do want to see this in a playable state already, to the point that probably I can't finish the game. That's almost certainly a bit too much, but you're going to give me a good experience. So that's really what I am. Do I think I can trust you? Is it your first, and let's say major project, because of course there are many developers that make very, very small projects that don't get anywhere while they're finding their feet. So can I trust you? Is it your first major project? And yeah, I think that's really where my criteria ends. Everything after that is just going to be judgment on a case-by-case basis.
You want them vested. Yeah, you want them vested.
And I want them to be able to carry on. Game development's not easy, and most people won't make money from it. And
because the developer that's making like Concord, like coming back to I'm not picking on Concord, but I'm saying they're not really vested, because there's all bunch, as a corporation, the liquid assets that they may have put into it or whatever, they can walk away from.
And this is where your question is going to be, do I trust you? And that's when I'm hoping that, for example, the dev has some vlogs or whatever explaining what they're doing, why they're doing it, and that they're going to have a development history. I'm never going to pick up their early access on day one, ever. But if I see they've been doing early access for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and they're developing the game, I might think about it. The other one is probably if it's been in early access for 3 years, I'm going to find it very difficult to invest. Very difficult, because that's when I start thinking, hold on, at what point is this not really early access anymore?
Yeah, because I was praising Dave the Diver like crazy. I was like, y'all need, I was a day one Dave the Diver person. I was like, y'all need to play this game. No, it's early access. I'm not going to play it. It's an amazing game. Y'all need to try it. But now, like I said, I got it a little bit cheaper than had I bought it at release. So
I'm also okay with that. If there's some sort of reward for early access, if you get the 10% off, 25% off, whatever it might be, that's always nice as well to show that. And this sounds very, very arsey, but I do want to know that the developer appreciates that people are taking this risk rather than it just being you get to pay full price early.
Yeah, I don't think that sounds bad at all. I think with early access, you have that kind of double-edged sword, and I think Com definitely hit one of the aspects of it. You are experiencing a shittier version of the game ahead of time. So, I mean, it's just going to be objectively worse. So when you get the full game, you're already going to have your experiences with an inferior version of this game. And so you're probably not going to have the same experience as somebody who gets it on release day and it's a polished product. So you're kind of sacrificing that opportunity to get that new experience with a quality game in order to make sure that it's a quality game for everyone. And I don't dislike early access. I have some issues with it. And one of those being, I don't have the time. If every game comes out early access, I can't provide feedback on all of them and give you anything meaningful while at the same time just trying to enjoy what's going on. Because at the end of the day, sometimes I just want to play a game and have it be good without me contributing to that. I just want somebody to give me something awesome, which maybe I'm being a bit selfish there, but like I paid for this. I want it to be a fun experience for me. Yeah. And as much as I recognize that there's value in the feedback I can provide, sometimes I just want to zone out and play a silly game.
I don't think I approach it from an altruistic standpoint for myself, but I know what you're saying. But I do have things that I do outside of gaming that, I try to give more people buffer to be able to do the things that they need to do so that later on they can accomplish those things in a more, like you said, polished form. I'm trying not to be very specific with what I do outside of this stuff, but it's a lot of volunteer things. It's a lot of community things. It's
don't worry, we'll put the details in the description.
Yeah, no, Legion's address, his full name.
But it does help individuals with mobility issues that can't walk, kids, things like that, for physical therapy and things like that. So I do a lot of stuff with that. But my point here is that I inherently have a bias toward trying to be patient towards those things, and so maybe that translates in my mind somehow to say, oh, I'll give them a chance, that's fine, no big deal.
I'd just like to clarify, I don't think my participation in early access is altruistic at all. I just think it has value that can make a better experience for other players. That's not the reason I'm getting involved. It's just a possible outcome. I don't think I'm some fucking hero because I wanted to play Baldur's Gate 3 early. I definitely just wanted that game.
Let me just be very clear. You are our hero, Banana.
Let me also be clear. We have discovered also the Legion actually does believe they're a hero.
Yeah.
While simultaneously, don't call me a hero. Praise me. I'm curious if
use other words, synonyms for hero.
What a paragon. I'm curious if you've had the experience with early access that I've had. So I've early access backed, I think, 3 projects ever. And this would have been around the sort of Kickstarter days. So we're talking about the early to mid 2010s when that was really in its heyday, as far as I know. So the ones that I backed were Massive Chalice, Pillars of Eternity, which I don't know if it had an early access, but it definitely was available on Kickstarter, and Xenonauts. So that was the XCOM tribute. I have enjoyed all three of those games. I had a great time with them. I played them all in early access, and I played them all when they came out. However, I haven't finished any of them, because by the time you added up my early access time and my post-release date time, it was just so many hours in the game that I didn't want to play it anymore. So I wonder if you've had that experience where you've almost burnt yourself out on the early access, and then the game gets released and you just don't care anymore.
I'll because it's on the top of my head when you said that. I approach it differently because I also have a YouTube channel, and so it depends on the game. So like Baldur's Gate 3, so I had a ton of hours playing it before it came out in actual release, and so I thought to myself, I'll make a couple of videos about things that I've found interesting. I did not know the game was going to blow up. I had no clue. To me, it was just Baldur's Gate 3, because all I had been hearing is negativity about, the turn-based game in modern systems, that's not going to work. And then the old head, the OG players of Baldur's Gate, is like, this is not Baldur's Gate. So I didn't think there was actually going to be a well-received community. I just thought, I'll just make it like I do now. Like, I find that interesting, so I'm going to make a video about it, some aspect of an RPG title that I like. And then those things took off. So from my perspective, the early access was a tool for me to be able to give player insight. And so I couldn't really approach it from the way you're thinking. But I saw it as like, I know this about this game, and y'all may not, and maybe sitting on the fence like, should I even play this game, or what's it about, or give me some heads up that when I get in it, I'm not completely clueless. I can watch a quick video that's not spoilery or whatever, and it kind of gives me that leverage to be able to go into the game and, boots on the ground information.
So you actually ended up enjoying the game from a different perspective entirely. The early access experience wasn't the same experience as when the game was released.
Yeah, and so now like you've seen me like pace Veilguard from a very different way that you guys do. That's my norm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Banana.
I would say with the Baldur's Gate 3 early access, I got it. I played through the available sequence a few times, and then I took a long break from that game. I got enough information from the early access to know this is a game I'm excited about. This is a game I'm definitely going to play when it's released. It's not there yet, but it's a game I fully expect to enjoy. And maybe as like a protection effort, I decided I'm not going to play this to death so that when it comes out, I hate it. I'm going to play it so that I have that appetizer feeling. Like this is what you eat before you eat to make you more hungry. That's what the early access of Baldur's Gate 3 was for me. This is the taste of what you're going to get when the early access completes and we release the game. And it made me excited about the release of the game, but I didn't gorge myself on it so that when the game came out, I was like, I've had enough. I can't do anymore.
And that's important. If you want to have a chance to go on and enjoy the game in the way that you expect to, I think that's depending on the kind of person you are. So I'm speaking very much from my perspective, honestly, and apparently from yours slightly. We have to limit the amount that we play these, because we will become very, very capable of getting burnt out. And oddly enough, I was recently given as a gift, not from the studio, Xenonauts 2, which is now in early access. And I played it for about 2 hours and then uninstalled and deleted the game. Because that was the same idea. It was, no, I want to make sure that when the time comes, I can really enjoy this game when it comes out. And it was just there to whet the appetite. Just there to give me that little push of, yes, I really do want to play this. And then on the day of the final release, it'll be as fresh as anything can be. And I think that's one of the interesting things I find with gaming in particular, somewhat with films, also with books, is the replayability of a game, for me, is very rarely a factor. I don't particularly care if a game has branching paths, has branching endings. I don't care if it's got massive alternatives and huge choices I can make where choice 1 vastly alters the world state. The Witcher 2, in particular, I'm thinking of as a very good example for that, where you can really follow 2 massive paths through the game. For me, replayability of a game only comes when I've forgotten what actually happened in the original game. That's it. I don't care if it's the same story again, I'll happily do it. So I always have to have that big time in between playing a game for the first time and then playing a game for the second time. So that's why I think I approach early access in the way that Banana seems to as well. Give me that taste, give me that little bit, and then I'm going to come back later, fresh, but knowing that I want to play it.
I just love gamers who like love to approach new titles and say like, see, my choices, they said my choices matter. My choices didn't matter. I never romanced Triss in Witcher 1. Why am I romancing her in Witcher 2? So
it's another one of Com's accidental romances, I'm sure.
Your choices matter.
Oh no, Triss was deliberate.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah, your choices matter, you think. You like to think that they do. It's like this whole like if they chose what you like, if your choices were kind of like what the developer said, yeah, that's our canon choice, then you're going to be happy. But that's not always the case. And I think that there's nothing new. And it's like I said, I don't want to pick on Velgard or anything, but I hear this a lot about Velgard. It's like, well, my choices didn't matter. What RPG title that has series has the choices always been consistent? There's not one, even in Mass Effect, there's some stuff that happens that I'm not going to go into that one, but this is not that lore reveal type subject, but there's some inconsistencies, but that's okay.
No, I'm going to go into the Mass Effect one now. I'm thinking of Mass Effect, nothing big. I'm thinking of Mass Effect 3, a very specific thing. And I'm thinking of whether or not you save the Rachni.
Right.
In the original game. It ultimately doesn't really matter. Yes, you'll end up with, I think, more points on your war score table. But if you didn't save the Rachni, we've now got Space Rachni, which will replace them in that quest. If you didn't save Rex, then we've got Rex Mark II. If you didn't save Grunt, then we've got that guy who looks a lot like Grunt. And yeah, there are minor differences to the way their stories end. Ultimately, it doesn't change a huge amount. It was respectful of your choices as far as a video game could be. And it's a thing that you and I have talked about in private, and it's that idea, and I think we don't always keep this in mind, of exponential growth. And that's what these changes are in video games, is exponential growth. We're not just adding a little branching path here and there. As soon as we start branching, we start doing things to the power of. And now we end up with these enormous numbers. Just take the number 2 and multiply it by the power of 2 20 times and see the ridiculous number that you're going to start ending up with very, very quickly. That's the path that game developers risk treading down if they really start respecting your choice. And that's why, a game will never, outside of it, be able to respect your choice going along through a series. It's always going to have to make these canon decisions for you. It's always going to have to make fresh restarts. I wish it wasn't that way.
Well,
but
I
it's
think
just reality.
I think that's why you won't have a Baldur's Gate DLC, because I think it's very smart of Larian to realize, hey, look, you're already level 12. If we make you even higher, you're just a walking god. What enemies are we going to throw at you at this point? And the only way they could make a DLC work, and I've said this kind of out loud, is if they kind of almost made some of your characters as prequel type characters. Which, like Shadowheart, you could basically reset her to level 1 because of her events before that. She does forget a lot of things. So that's very reasonable that you could do it if they approached it that way. But there's a lot of stuff when it comes to some of those titles that intrinsically have a network of branches of decisions. I remember reading about Larian Wood talking about the Shadowheart's little funny box. We didn't know what it was. We just knew that it was interesting. We didn't know what impact it would have on us because we didn't have access to Chapter 2. So none of that stuff that happens with it, we knew. But they kept talking about like that little thing has created more narrative trees than we ever thought it would. And in hindsight, now it's kind of obvious. Like, you could have said this, you could have said that, you could have done this. And that leads to those consequences that they had to write in, that they wouldn't, like, every time they wrote something else came out of that, and something else came out of that. And so the guy who was one of the main writers and developers for Dragon Age specifically talked about Morgan. And we and you had talked about that from before. He knew the Morgan character was going to be a problem. He insisted that, like, this is going to be a character. We're going to fully develop it, but it's going to create a problem down the road because of the choices that aren't going to be consistent. He knew this in advance. So to kind of like say Morgan is not the same Morgan I knew from Origins, Dragon Age 3 or Inquisition. Yeah, they knew that at Origins. Even in the Origins development, they knew that there was going to be a problem here, because when you go from series 1, 2, 3 to now Velgard, no matter what happens, your choices don't always translate. Liliana could die in Origins. She's not going to, she should not be there in 2, 3, right? But she is. So they kind of give you a canonical reason. But my point here, like you were saying, is that sometimes those network, the little tree of decisions just can't be implemented. They just can't.
We each approach those games that give you decisions with a different mentality than a lot of the people who complain about the decisions not mattering. And we allow ourselves to get immersed in those stories so that when you make a decision and you take out Rex, he doesn't make it through Mass Effect 1, and you get that, beer fest moment, like, hi guys, I'm Rex's brother, can you call me Rex? That completely nonsensical, your decision didn't actually matter kind of fix they have to make the story continue going on. We accept that because we allowed ourselves to get immersed in the moment, so that in the moment our decision to kill Rex mattered. And now we see this other person not as the storytelling, MacGuffin to keep things going in the direction that the developers want. It was a way for them to say, we respected your decision, but we have a story to tell. And if you embrace the immersion, if you genuinely accept that Rex is gone and you treat this new character as if they're not Rex, you can still enjoy the game. But a lot of these people who complain that their decisions don't matter seem to approach it differently, and they see that oh, this is just Rex by another name and my decision didn't matter. It feels like you're approaching it from the standpoint of the world building isn't important to you, and for each of us it's hugely important, so that's why we're okay with those decisions to say that, like, well, Rex is gone. I know this character is filling the role of Rex. He might as well just be called Rex, but Rex is gone. I am fully committed to that idea because I allowed myself to be immersed in the game. I allowed myself to believe that my decision mattered. So for me, my version of the Mass Effect universe is different than yours because my decisions matter, and I'm choosing to make my decisions matter. I think that's a huge part of the issue I have with those complaints, like, oh, my decisions didn't matter. Then you don't care enough. you want your decisions to matter without investing in them. And I don't think that's a fair criticism to say that, like, I don't care about the world building. I care about purely mechanical results of my decisions. And I don't support that.
So for you then, if I've understood, and it would be similar to me, it's that my decisions matter because they mattered in the moment. They mattered in the emotional reactions that I had, that the characters had, in that storytelling right there. And I'm not looking for long-term infinite consequence to my decisions.
I think we also don't approach these decisions purely pragmatically. Like, I didn't want Rex to live because I needed a Krogan tank. I wanted Rex to live because I cared about Rex. Mm-hmm. So when I make that decision in the moment, my thought process is, man, I hope they really give me a replacement for Rex. I lost a friend, basically, and that's why it matters. And yeah, there's definitely going to be games where that immersion isn't done well enough for you to get to that point, and that's a fair criticism. But when you're saying that, like, oh, it's just Rex 2.0, they gave you enough to care about the character of Rex. So when you get somebody who's filling the role that Rex filled, but isn't Rex, it's not the same. It still has that kind of disappointment that Rex isn't with you anymore.
Yeah, because there are, in Baldur's Gate, the original one, you could have a character, a companion, like Minsk or Jaheira or some of those that are in later titles. If there's a critical hit while you're at low health, you'll get chunked. Yep. It's called being chunked. And so you just fly into a bunch of pieces, right? They don't just die. You can't just take them to a priest and resurrect them. There's no resurrecting that. So there is a permadeath mechanic in that game. And so to see them in 2, it's like, oh, here they are, even in 3. And my point here is that I guess even from the beginning of BioWare, they've been retconning your decisions. So just, take it in stride.
Yeah, imagine the opening sequence of Baldur's Gate 2 after playing Baldur's Gate 1 and having Khalid and Dynahair both get chunked in your playthrough. And then you get to Baldur's Gate 2 and you're supposed to be tremendously upset that they died. Like, they died forever ago. And I watched the horror of their death. This is not traumatic for me at all.
I love the idea of your character just sitting there like, oh, they're dead? Got away with that one.
I heard Mince cry out, Dynahair, no!
Yeah.
I heard it. It happened.
But that's when you let you yourself live in that moment, and you felt that emotion, and that's why that decision matters to you and will continue to matter. I'm still about that time that Zaid died when in Mass Effect 2, when I tried to send him back to the ship. I didn't think he would die. I thought he'd keep everyone safe. He didn't, and it still bums me out to this day. Even though, speaking of Mass Effect and its respect for your decisions, I've played it like 6 times. I've got different playthroughs, some where he survived, some where he didn't, but each individual one where he died or someone else did, it still matters.
I think those games work best when there's the replayability factor to it. It's just that when you come, and I think I can, we're called the Gamer's Advocate. I could totally understand where a lot of people come from this, like, I guess my choices didn't matter because so-and-so was there in Velgarden and he should not be there, whatever. Or I romance Soulless, so he should have an affinity for the Inquisitor or something like that. That's fine. I completely side with that, because if you replay it again, that situation won't be different. That's the part I don't think works. You have to kind of make the situation variable enough that maybe it doesn't impact the bigger picture. But there's enough narrative going on there that they would have respected some of the things that you had said or some of the things that you had done in the past. So that way, when you play it again, you could see the other side of it.
At which point, we'll probably find ourselves complaining that they only paid lip service to the changes that took place in our world. Not necessarily. Maybe we'd be much more honest about it than that. But I think my problem with games and respecting decisions really comes down to a matter of realizing that they can't really do it. Mm-hmm. And there are some decisions that can be respected. There are some that can't be. But the pure practicality leads me to possibly unfairly or unjustly giving game companies a lot of leeway when it comes to respecting my choice from game to game, basing it in that very purely pragmatic perspective. And maybe I'm giving them too much credit. Maybe actually I should say, no, you need to find a way around this. But it's the way I come into it.
Yeah, the whole time I was thinking, I was like, this is not the topic we agreed on, but I'm totally okay with it.
Yeah, this is fine.
Yeah. Well, that's why I was branching it, because I kept like saying, okay, I can make this work. If we do like State of Gaming, I already knew in my head like we could kind of make that work.
I was definitely thinking like, we can stretch this out to a full episode, and I think it's an episode I'd be very happy with.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to bring up that we had a different topic in mind.
When we really got into the publishing side, I was really interested.
We appreciate everybody being here. If you liked the video and the audio version, because we are on Spotify and Amazon Music and
iTunes.
Yeah, we're on iTunes. I always forget all the audio stuff we're on. But if you like all that,
we're somewhere.
Give it a comment there. Commenting on our videos really, really helps. We have a Discord as well, and we appreciate everybody being here. We will check you guys later. Bye-bye.